Being the Ricardos is nominated for 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards.
Now we're cooking with gas.
Including Best Actress Nicole Kidman.
I need you to help me save my marriage.
Best Actor Javier Bardem.
Lucy, I'm home.
And 3 Critics' Choice Awards.
Are you drunk?
It's 10 a.m., Vivian, so, of course.
Being the Ricardos. For your consideration. Rated R. Now streaming.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. Hi. Welcome to part 2 of Beyond Words, an annual celebration of Writers Guild Award nominees for screenwriting, hosted by the Writers Guild Foundation in partnership with Final Draft, Variety, and of course, The Blacklist. I'm Franklin, founder and CEO of The Blacklist, and needless to say, because I already said it, but it is a real delight to be here to moderate these 2 conversations. But before we meet 3 of this year's nominees for original screenplay, let's take a look at clips from their nominated films. All right, let's have our 3 nominees put their cameras on and let's chat. So we've got Zach Baylin, screenwriter of King Richard, Adam McKay, writer of Don't Look Up, and Aaron Sorkin, screenwriter of Being the Ricardos. 3 quick bits of housekeeping. One, I'm going to start by asking each of you some very rapid fire questions, just as sort of a way of introduction. And then we'll sort of move to a more conversational portion of the hour. Those of you who are watching, there will be an open Q&A towards the end of the conversation. You can put those questions in the Q&A box on Zoom. I think you can also upvote and downvote those questions. So if there's something that you want to see asked, you don't have to write it twice. You can just indicate it with an upvote. And then lastly, shout out to Elizabeth Green and Elizabeth Vega, our ASL interpreters for the hour, who obviously do amazing work. To that end, my first question in the rapid fire question will sort of be in the tradition of self-introductions for the purposes of Zoom. And Zach, I'm going to start with you because you're the first person in my little Zoom grid here. If you were introducing yourself as a character in your own screenplay, how would you do that?
Probably say Zach Baylin, 41, mediocre tennis player, and a little out of place in this panel.
And so I'm going to blow through each of the questions with each person, and then we'll just move the conversation. Second question, complete this sentence. I write movies about.
I write movies about hopefully complicated characters who, exist in the real world.
How many years did it take from realizing that you wanted to be a screenwriter till you became a member of the WGA?
Probably about 20 years, I would say.
And then last question, favorite bit of storytelling that is neither a movie nor a TV show throughout all of human storytelling history?
Maybe Great Gatsby.
All right, Adam, same questions. How would you introduce yourself in your own screenplay?
I would say Adam McKay, 53, salt and pepper hair, 6'5", 240 pounds, more neurotic than his size suggests.
I write movies about?
I write movies about the unraveling of our civilization and reality.
Gap between wanting to be a screenwriter and joining the WGA?
I think that was about 8 years.
Favorite bit of storytelling that is not a movie or television show?
Movie or television show, I would say Paul Auster's Book of Illusions, but then I'm going to jam in another one. I'm going to jam in S-Town, the podcast. I'm going to say those 2 have knocked me on my butt in the last 20 years.
That podcast is amazing.
Right? Yeah.
Aaron, same questions. How would you introduce yourself in your own screenplay?
Well, when I'm introducing a character, I actually don't. The only description I'll give is if it's necessary. If we need to know that this person has a broken leg or something, so it would just be Aaron Sorkin, late 50s ish.
That's the answer we were looking for. I write movies about.
Everybody writes movies about conflict. I generally, in my case, the movies that I write are about conflicts of ideas.
Gap between wanting to be a screenwriter and joining the guild.
5 years.
And favorite bit of storytelling that's not a movie or television show.
There's some good storytelling in the Bible, actually, particularly the Old Testament.
I was waiting for somebody to actually give that answer.
Yeah. So I would say the story that begins with Abraham, and it'll end one of these days.
Franklin, can I change my answer? My favorite bit of storytelling now is the American flag.
Yeah,
it tells the story of the original colonies, the unification.
Yeah.
This is sort of what I was going to with the question. So here's where I want to start, and that's sort of at the beginning, because one of the things that I'm most fascinated by with writers is how you choose the thing that you go the distance on. Because fundamentally, there are sort of a million stories, literally an infinite number of stories you could tell. I think we all sort of think about things that we might tell, and then eventually we hone in on the thing that we want to invest the labor to write 100, 110, 120 pages in screenplay form. And I'm curious how each of you generally, but specifically on this project, sort of whittled away all of the infinite possibilities to deciding this is the thing that I'm going to make the attempt of going the distance on. And we'll go in reverse order. I'll start with you on this one, because I know that this is a story that has fascinated you for a long time, if I'm not mistaken.
That's me going first.
Yeah, that's you.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen. It's what I do is I'm not looking for a theme. I'm not looking for a genre. I'm the way a batter will look for a pitch to hit. Their pitch. They've got less than a second to decide if they're going to swing the bat, and they're thinking, "Do I have a chance to hit this?" I'm thinking, "Do I have a chance to write a good screenplay? Is there a chance here that I can write a good screenplay?" And once I've made that decision, and it takes me a little while to make that commitment, because, like the others, I live and die with these things. It's going to be a long commitment that I'm putting in. And once I feel like, yes, I think I can get my ball in the bat, then I want to know, can I get my blood into this? Can I get worked up about these different points of view?
And is there a moment when you know? Or is it like a slow build and eventually you sort of wake up one morning and you're like, right, this is the thing I'm going to do next? Or is there a Kairos moment where everything becomes clear and this is the direction you're headed?
Yeah, but knowing doesn't mean you're going to be right. I said yes to being the Ricardos because I felt like I had enough, and I had a structure that I liked, and I knew about parts of the story that I could see. I didn't know the whole movie by any means. I didn't know how it was going to end, things like that. But I certainly didn't know if I was going to be right, that I was going to write a good screenplay. But you know, at some point you do have to make that commitment and say, this is what I'm doing next.
Adam, how about you?
Yeah, it's, I come from a background that's more comedy. So a lot of my background, when I worked at SNL or even doing theater in Chicago, has always been tied to what the kind of dominant feeling in the world is and trying to tap into that. And at a certain point, that took a very strange turn for me years ago, where the dominant feeling started to get very disturbing and started to feel very careening and chaotic and teetering. And, following the path I came from, I decided to follow it. And so the way I look at it is it an idea that I could write 400 pages on? Is it an idea that I'm going to have to limit myself on? And in the case of the projects that we've done recently with The Big Short or Vice or Don't Look Up, these were, or even the comedies I did with Will Ferrell, these are all movies that easily I could have written 300-400 pages on these because they're ideas that keep you up at night. They're ideas that are driving you. And in the case of Don't Look Up, it's an idea with the climate crisis that is really filling me with a lot of terror. And I'm desperately looking for a way to process that. And then, like Aaron said, I'm hoping that other people out there are feeling that as well. I mean, that's kind of the second part of it.
But when you know that you could write 400, 500 pages, so it sounds like in this case you decided I'm going to write a movie sort of addressing the climate crisis or sort of about the climate crisis. How do you then find the story? I mean, I know that you and David share a story by credit here, obviously, but I'm just curious, like how you then land on, okay, this is the movie that I'm writing, even though you know this is the rough box that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think the trick is that it's not necessarily that it's good that you write 300 pages or 400 pages. It's that you feel that overflowing excitement. I mean, if I felt like I could write 600 pages, then I would do a mini series. I would do something else. But it's that feeling that it's almost too much. And the way I interpret that is that there's an energy to it and that there's a crackle to it. And once again, you know that not everyone's going to agree with it, but you hope enough people agree with it and you feel this passion. And we're doing this for a reason, otherwise we could all sell real estate or do something else. I mean, the reason we're doing it is we really, really care about what we're doing. So I kind of like that feeling. And really, I'm not being arbitrary when I say it feels like you could write 200-300 pages. That's kind of the sweet spot for me. And I should say, I read Molly's Game that Aaron wrote, and I think it was 175 pages. And it took me 10 minutes to read it. It just flowed. And you could tell Aaron had that bolt behind what he was writing. So that's kind of like he said, the sweet spot of the bat. That's what you're looking for, where it's your whole essence as a writer can be dedicated to this subject. And certainly with Don't Look Up, I could have written 300 pages, no problem. The original cut was 3 hours, 20 minutes long. We could have gone on and on and on. I'm sure certain people are like, oh God, but for us, we had such passion for it and such deep feeling that you can just go all day long and it doesn't feel like work.
I'm fascinated by the notion that you sort of spec'd out 200 to 300 pages as being the perfect length for a feature. But if it tipped up to 600, then it's likely a limited series. And I'm just curious, I imagine to some extent it's a sort of like instinct thing, but is there a difference in sort of what that feeling is between the 200, 300 page scope and the 600 page scope for you?
I mean, I'd be curious to see what the other writers think of this, but you can kind of, I am in my 50s, so I've been doing this a long time. And there is kind of a muscular instinct you have. We're about to put out this show about the Lakers dynasty. And when I read that book, I knew that was not a movie. I knew that was a mini series. There was no way you could make that fit within 2 hours, 2.5 hours, even 3 hours, even 3.5 hours. You do kind of get a sense of, do you have A, B, C, D story, or do you have EFG, H delta omega? And at that point, that's kind of when you're in miniseries territory, which we've been playing around with a lot more through our production company. And I love the miniseries because it really is like those movies we've seen in past years. They used to make them in the 70s and 80s that were 5 hours long, and we don't really have that much anymore. But yeah, there's a little bit of an instinct that kicks in, Franklin, to answer your question very directly.
I want to actually use that as a pivot to ask Zach sort of the same question, because I think, so there have been multiple documentaries about the Williams sisters. They're still very much part of the sort of public iconography of sports, and Richard Williams along with them. Can you talk a little bit about how this became the thing that you wrote and why, again, it was a movie for you and how you sort of landed on the specific movie story you wanted to tell within those very big lives?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was one of those rare times that I've had where, I mean, I was in a meeting with a producer and this idea came up kind of roughly, but well, I don't know, a lot of times you're in those meetings and someone suggests an idea and you take it home and you think about it a little bit and, there's something that percolates, but it doesn't, it doesn't come all the way to fruition. And this was like, this guy, Tim White, who's a buddy of mine, mentioned that he thought there was a movie about Richard and Venus and Serena and their sort of upbringing. And it's never really happened to me before in my life, but I really saw the whole movie like immediately. And now I'm trying to do that every time, I approach something and it doesn't happen like that. But, I was a big tennis fan. I'd spent a lot of time. I'd written a television project in the past that sort of investigated a little bit of that world. And I think for me, it was just really realizing that Richard was just this extremely dynamic, unique, self-defeating character who really had this very clear, desire to prove something for himself. And then that took this really crazy, form that he had. The story is ludicrous that he came up with this idea to raise tennis champions, and he was going to take his family into an all-white sport. And it was a big like FU to the world in a really fun way. And so with that one, it was one of the few times I've really had a piece of amazing material just kind of fall in my lap, and I saw it. But and now I've tried to use that as a bit of a template of how I look for things, because I tend to write a lot of true stories, and sometimes you fall in love with a world, or like, I don't know, for years I've been trying to figure out some way about, like, I love kidnapping for some reason. And there's a couple big kidnapping stories that I've focused on for years, and I could read all about them, like, for days, but I can't find what makes that a movie or what makes that a TV show, to Adam's point. I mean, I think that, it has to be this perfect like coalition of world that feels really exciting and relevant. And then, the right characters to move through that. And I know I've gone down a lot of wrong paths with scripts that I thought were, had one of those things, but not the other. And, ultimately I spent a lot of time in the back of I was in Local 52 for a long time, and I spent a lot of time in the back of a prop truck with scripts that I thought had potential, but they didn't click, And so I think what both these guys had said is it's the ones that keep you up at night, that you can't get them out of your head. You want to keep investigating those stories, but finding the through line really is ultimately the thing for me.
Okay, so now I actually want to talk about process on exactly that point. And I'm going to start, Zach, with you and Aaron, because both original screenplays, but both real life figures that people already have a pre-existing relationship with. And I'm curious, like emotionally and sort of mentally, I'm curious how you embark on telling those stories. Is there a sort of intense research period, and then you sort of set the research aside and try to tell the emotional story that you glean from it? Do you sort of map out a spine of events that you want it to travel? Like, how do you each approach telling the story of people we know?
What? I'm sorry, Zach. Go ahead.
No, why don't you go? You go. I'd like to actually.
Okay. Well, it was Franklin. It was exactly what you said, which is, there was a research period, but then for me, after the research period comes the climbing the walls period, just the misery and the agony of, okay, you know a lot of facts. Now, what's this movie about? What does it look like? What's the structure of it? And at some point there, I have to leave the real people behind, and they have to become characters. Strange as this may sound, that the properties of people and the properties of characters have almost nothing to do with each other. People don't speak in dialogue. Their lives don't lay out in a series of scenes that form a narrative. So you have to make them yours, and you have to pretend it's fiction.
Zach, you have a similar approach?
I don't know. I was going to say I'd do whatever Aaron does, but I mean, I think with this one, I had so much like archival tape of Richard, and I like just kind of fell in love with the way he spoke and the way he moved through the world. And so I tried to say really, have a lot of, veracity around him and his voice. And so there's a lot of actual dialogue in the movie. But it's, again, I've done a few others of these now, and I kind of, honestly, I look at Social Network. I look at the Steve Jobs movie and a lot of the films that Aaron has made, and I think what he's done in the way you can try and take the essence of people and the events, but find an interesting structure that you maybe have to fold these things into to actually make it give it a dramatic narrative that it doesn't have. So, I mean, for me, what my process is now is that I do a ton of research, and as I'm researching, I'm highlighting things in books that I love, but sometimes, and saying this is a scene, but I don't know where they're going to live in the movie. And sometimes, I don't know. I read Rick Macy's book, who's the tennis coach in this movie, who's just like another crazy character. And there were scenes in there that I knew, okay, this has to be in the movie. I don't know what it's going to say about where these characters are turning and where those moments live. But I knew there was something cinematic in those moments. So I think it's, it's kind of throwing everything against the wall. And then again, to Aaron's point, like you have a lot of facts and you feel like you become an expert on things, but ultimately like that those facts don't necessarily make an interesting story.
Adam, it looked like you were going to say something.
I love this line of conversation because I think it doesn't necessarily adhere to nonfiction characters. We had the experience with The Big Short where we had Carell's character, the real person, had suffered a traumatic loss, which they were not comfortable sharing in the movie. So we created a fictional loss that changed that character. And the same with Vice, where we were so interested in the mystery of what made Dick Cheney. And when we found out that his wife had come from an abusive household and kind of had picked Dick Cheney. And then in the end, when Dick Cheney, whose whole life was about his children and his family, but he basically destroyed that by staying with the politics. But I think those same kind of rules apply to fiction. I think the idea that traumatic events, fork in the road events, determine sort of what we're then trying to make sense of as people for the rest of our lives. I mean, I'll just give an example from my life. I had my great uncle drowned in a lake in Nebraska back in the 1890s. And because he drowned, his girlfriend ended up marrying my great grandfather. And I could list a bunch of this kind of stuff. So I think those same rules apply for fiction or nonfiction. In the case of our movie, with DiCaprio's character, Dr. Mindy, he suffered from panic attacks. And even though our movie is a ludicrous comedy, that was still one of the emotional drives of the movie, was the idea of the person who's got to warn mankind suffers from panic attacks. And so I love this discussion of, and like Aaron said, even though they're real people, they're also characters. And that line between the two, I think, is endlessly fascinating.
Well, I think this was the sort of the follow-up that I wanted to ask you, Adam, which is that you don't have, there's not ingredients already on the sort of kitchen table, right, from which you're going to make the meal. How do you sort of out of whole cloth or approach creating out of whole cloth these people that are going, or these characters that are going to inhabit the story that you're trying to tell?
A lot of what you do, and I'm curious what Zach and Aaron think about this, but a lot of what I do is I draw from myself. So, there's a moment in our movie where Mark Rylance's character, who's sort of an amalgam of all the tech billionaires, looks at Dr. Mindy and he says, "We already know what you are. We have algorithms that determine consumer types, and you're a lifestyle idealist, which means that you think you believe in things, but you run away from pain." Well, that's me. That's anytime you see in our movie, I'm calling something out, I'm calling myself out. Obviously, when I studied improv in Chicago, our teacher, Del Close, would always be like, the one thing you're an expert on is yourself. So I'm always drawing on my own contradictions, my own insecurities, my own confidences, whatever it is, and sort of populating the movie with all those contradictions. And in a way, I think that's what happens with the nonfiction as well, is, you lay these sort of story archetypes over these lives that are seemingly chaotic or career-based or filled with sort of seminal events. And one of the fun things about writing nonfiction is to really crack the mystery of who a person is. And that's what I think about when I think about screenwriting in general, is the mystery of it is, I think, what drives a lot of it. And for Don't Look Up, the mystery was, how can we be staring at empirically clear, crystal clear evidence that we're destroying the livable climate on a time frame that is, barreling down on us maybe in the next 10 years, and yet we don't deal with it. Why is that? And nothing drives you more than, like Zach was saying, he's fascinated with kidnappings. I know what you mean. Like, why?
I don't want to dig too deep on that one, but
another question I want to ask about is audience. And I think there's this sort of direct question, which is like, do you think about your audience when you write? That's not the question that I want to ask, because there are always multiple audiences that ultimately are going to be sort of consuming the thing that you've written, right? There are the producers that will read it and the financiers who will decide whether to put money behind it. In, I think, the case of all of your movies, the subject matter, again, is very emotionally fraught for a lot of people, whether it's people who are fans of the Williamses, whether it's people who are fans of Lucy and Desi, or have, an instinctive reaction to the word communist. Adam, the climate crisis continues to be a absurdly controversial issue, inexplicably. How do you think about all of those audiences, or do you, as you try to tell the story that you're writing? And then this sort of addendum to that is there, do you start not thinking about it, but is there an inevitable moment at which you have to start thinking about it because you're having conversations with financiers, producers, the actual Williams sisters, whatever? And I'll let whoever wants to talk about that one jump in, but I suspect this will be something that you can talk amongst yourself about as well.
Yeah. I would say for me, I definitely at the beginning of things, I try not to think about that. And I'm just trying to find what I think is going to be if I've found a story that is compelling to me, then I want to pursue that. And there's something cynical in the back of my head that's like, will this find an audience, or will it find I'm not a director, so will it find a director that sees the same vision or same potential in it for me? But definitely my first instincts are just trying to get obsessed with something that I want to write about, or that I want to see, or I've watched a movie that that becomes an inspiration point that I want to emulate in some way. But then as you move down, I didn't direct this movie, and so that the script keeps iterating as it gets to Will, as it gets to Ray Green, the director, and then it opens up, and I do start having conversations about, okay, well, specifically for me with this film, that there are elements of the story of a Black family that became apparent to me that were going to be important well beyond when I started writing it. And that became a very collaborative conversation of, what is it going to mean for a demographic that I'm not a part of? And that was really informative. And then, really did influence sort of, scenes that grew out of that I think in a very positive way. But yeah, definitely the initial instinct is always like, I don't know, do I like this? Do I want to see this in the world?
Yeah, I think like nowadays, I've always approached it more from what you were just saying, Zach, which is, and what Aaron was saying, which is that kind of sweet spot feeling of engagement. But for me, something has changed recently where I've just never lived in a world that feels like this. And so the challenge of this movie was, can you tell a story in a capsized ship? Can you tell a story where the ground underneath us, we can't even agree on the angle at which it's pitched? So with this script, there was, of course, the emotional drive to write it, which came out of my own fear, confusion, and like I said before, most importantly, that sense of mystery. But while I was writing it, I definitely was conscious of the fact, and maybe because it's ultimately mostly a comedy, and even before we started making it, I chose Netflix because I wanted it to be a world movie. I wanted it to have a big, fat launch. This was never a niche movie. This was never supposed to be that kind of movie. So as the world keeps changing, I find myself reorienting and thinking about how you write stories while the world's existing out there. Because I think if I was sitting at a computer keyboard writing a short story and the house was on fire, it would affect how I would write that short story. So this was like no experience I've ever had before on this project.
Did you find, sorry, can I ask a question? Did you find like writing it something that you were having obviously understandable anxiety about, and then spending 3 years actively thinking about it every day in the movie, a cathartic process, or it was, it added to your anxiety?
It probably saved my marriage writing this script, because my wife was so sick of me saying, what's going on in the world? The climate is dying. And I turn on the news. And I think finally at one point, my wife even said, why don't you write a goddamn script and leave me alone? So it was a major healthy process. And by the way, I should say, and I know we're talking about the writing process, but for the producers, for the VFX team, for the actors, everyone just felt this immense sense of relief that we were processing the collapse of the environment, the pandemic, the attack on the Capitol, the fact that the US may only have 3 years left of legitimate democracy, the fact that we were processing all that while laughing like goons was immeasurably helpful and a giant gift.
Aaron, I know you like to mix it up with your audience. Like, how do you approach that?
For me, it's the two poles. Actually, I just want to, before I answer the audience question, I just want to, I think, go back 2 spaces to something Adam said and when we're talking about characters and people, because I am a big fan of both of these writers. And one thing that Adam has found a way to do, he does things in movies that I previously thought you could only do in a play. That you could only do on stage. For instance, he had his cake and ate it too in The Big Short, when he'd do a scene and then just have Ryan Gosling turn to the camera and say it didn't happen like that. It happened this way. The same thing with the guys in the lobby at Deutsche, I think, or BFA, I can't remember. So I really admired that that he took sort of the spirit of the stage and put it on the screen. As for audiences, when I'm writing or when I'm looking around for something to write, I am absolutely not thinking, what is it the most people want and how can I give it to them? I'm not sure I'd be able to do that. I just also think it's not a very good recipe for good storytelling. I'm going to write something. I'm going to try to write something that I like, that I think my friends would like, and then I keep my fingers crossed that enough other people are going to like it that I get to keep doing it. However, once that's happened, once I've committed to this and I'm writing it or lately directing it, all I care about is the audience experience. I just think that before a film can be relevant, before it can be important, before it could be, any of the adjectives that we want to ascribe to our movies, especially this time of year, before it can be any of those things, it has to be a good movie. It has to simply work on I'm holding a bucket of popcorn level. And I am most interested in the audience's experience for that 2 hours in the darkened theater.
Anybody have anything else to add before I jump to my next question? I'm curious about, still on process, when you guys find yourselves that you've maybe written yourselves into a corner, plot-wise, character-wise, tonally, how do you get yourself out? I'm just asking all of the questions that I think people want to hear from people who are in y'all's seat so they can employ them in their own careers and writing. So
I'll take a stab at that, but
when you're screwed, how do you save yourself?
I'll take a stab at that, but for that, just adding on to my answer about the audience. I am I've been talking lately with Frances Haugen. She was the Facebook whistleblower, as well as a guy named Roger McNamee, who published a book a couple of years ago called Zucked. McNamee was he's a VC, an early Facebook investor, and became Zuckerberg's consigliere at some point. And the two of them were two of the first people to spot that something very bad was going on at Facebook. And it's social media and the destruction that is causing, and specifically Facebook, is to me what climate change is to Adam. I'm not saying I don't care about climate change. I'm saying this gets my blood up. But I worry that this is an important story and that I'm not smart enough to write it. So that's something that goes through my head. This really is a story that should be told to a lot of people, and maybe it would be better if Zach or Adam wrote it.
Franklin, I love the point that Aaron just made, which I think is one of the exciting things about the time that we're living in right now. We're dealing with stories that fight the story structure, that we're dealing with, like, that the powers that be are, they don't operate in a star chamber kind of situation where it's 5-6 people planning, these things morph and they evolve to get around people being upset. They get around, they rely on us being bored by the regulations. They rely on us being so comfortable and cozy with how great Facebook feels that, yeah, we know it sucks, but we're going to keep doing it. And I think what Aaron just said is like the center of the challenge of screenwriting at this exact moment that we're living in. Not just screenwriting, by the way, anything, the news, podcast, music. How do you deal with something that has become so evolved and so crafty and so boring and so confident? And it's really everything we're trying to kind of crack. So hearing Aaron talk about that, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so there for that project. I want to see Aaron take a whack at that script and let's go.
All right. I appreciate that. As far as, when you're stuck, what do you do? My recommendation is, first of all, stop. Don't keep, if it's coming out like ketchup out of a new bottle, stop. Step back. For me, I'm always clinging to intention and obstacle. Somebody wants something standing in their way of getting it. Just show the audience what this character wants, the tactics that the character uses to overcome the obstacle. That's going to be the story. So it's kind of back to basics, intention and obstacle. I would also recommend, and every writer is different, but I would also recommend get to the end. Don't get to page 40 and go back. Get to the end. Get to fade out. You're going to know a lot more about what you're writing by the time you get to the end. And then you can go back and start losing the things that aren't part of this story and start setting the table for the things that are.
Yeah, I would echo that totally. I think that just I try not to have expectations that it's good when I write it.
It's right.
And that it's a lot easier for me to react to a bad idea that I've had than it is to try and come up with a good idea on the spot. So I try to just, if I've hit a wall, I try to just jump over it and keep going and get to the end, and know that I'm going to look at a script that I would never show anyone. And I'm going to do that 100 times before I show it to anyone. So yeah, just keep going. And then I think something that helps me is just, I don't know, if I get locked, I try and just, follow the last thing that was good in the script and say and hang on to that character and just, where's that person at when they enter this next scene? And so a lot of times that idea of just holding on to the emotion or the challenge or conflict that the character went through in the previous scene can find a way into the next one. Even if it doesn't last, it's just like, okay, well, I understand the emotion in this moment, and I can understand what this person is going through the next time we see them. And then a lot of times, I get away from my computer. I try and go for a run, like play bad tennis, and then come back.
Anything you'd add? Fixes, solutions to?
Yeah, I think I actually do this kind of, these guys just expressed it very eloquently. I do a really silly, dumb thing, which is I literally pretend I've just paid $15 and I'm in the movie theater and I'm watching the movie and I'm at the part where I'm stuck. And I just try and become an audience member. And I just think, what would get me walking out of that theater saying, holy crap, I have never seen anything like that. And I've told other writers this, and they look at me like I'm a kindergarten teacher. It seems so rudimentary, but I really think Zach and Aaron are saying what I'm saying in a much more eloquent way. But you kind of have to remember that ultimately this is going to be projected onto a screen. There's going to be groups of people watching it. and there is a crackling energy in that room. And I just try and remind myself of that. And I may do what Zach said, which is I'll go for a walk. What I love to do is just watch another movie. I'll put another movie on in the background that I love. I remember years ago, I stuck on a script and I put the, what's the Adam McGowan film, The Sweet Hereafter, I think it was called. And I just put that on in the background. And it was so emotional and beautiful and well-balanced that just having that feeling in the room sort of reminded me of what it was like. But yeah, I literally do something as goofy as pretending I'm paying at a movie theater and watching it.
That's awesome. I mean, I do the movie thing too, and I also, like, to Adam's point, a lot of times if I'm stuck or I can't get in the mode of it, I'll read other scripts. You know, I like that. I'll read these guys. I'll pull up things I'll go to the nominated things from 5-10 years ago and pull them up and just try to. Sometimes just reading and seeing words on a page that actually look good from someone else can get your mind in the mode that you want to start typing. And even if that's the stuff you're typing sucks, it at least just like kind of unlocks something. And
so we have 7 minutes left, and I'm going to get in one last question. And that is, what is your sort of writerly indulgence or vice? And that can be something behavioral or sort of textual, like the thing that you don't necessarily need to write well, the thing that you rely on in your own writing that you know you don't need. Your work might even be better if you didn't do it, but you're going to do it regardless. In my own writing, I have a tendency to use adverbs too much. I know what happens. I always have to go back and remove them after I've written anything that I actually want to share. I don't know why it happens, but that's just what happens. I'm curious what yours are.
I feel like I can start to become listen, I got into this because I love dialogue. I love the sound of dialogue. It just sounds like music to me. My parents started taking me to see plays when I was too young to understand them, but I was listening to this dialogue being performed by great actors. So I am aware that my dialogue, the musicality of it, can start to get too cute for its own good. And the other thing is, there's a neat trick that's just worth a try as an exercise, which is simply cutting the last line of a scene just to see what happens. Cut it in your script, cut it in post, and interesting things can happen there.
Adam, how about you?
I mean, the big one, this sounds dumb, but just after the scene, writing smash cut 2. And it's like, it's just a cheat. It's like, it's saying basically to the reader, I'm going to fix it in the edit. And what I'm really telling the reader of the script, rather than relying on the quality of the scene, I'm telling him my amazing editor, Hank Corwin's going to do something cool in there. And it's a cop out. And I've done the thing that Aaron talks about, where you lose the last line. I lose the last 3 lines. Always a better road. But sometimes if you're writing 8-9 hours a day, I'll just do smash cut 2. And then it's a totally different image. Like, how cool is that? And then you get in the edit room and you're like, it's garbage.
Exactly the thing I was looking for. Zach, take us home, and then I'll wrap things up.
I mean, it's kind of the same thing. I spend a lot of time writing these totally unnecessary transitions from one scene to the next. That's like after, how you get someone out of a room and into the next scene. And because I want it to, I'm so worried that the reader is not going to turn the page, that, what's the last line that you put in, that's like the button on every scene. And then ultimately that stuff is never on screen. It doesn't make any difference. but I can really kind of spend way too much time on that. And I'd say, sometimes dialogue too. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this on this Q&A, that for a long time ago, I had this audio tape that I made of A Few Good Men. This was like before DVDs. And I had this thing, and on car rides, I would listen to this audio tape I had of A Few Good Men. And I sort of like would write dialogue out of that. So I have a lot of long dialogue in my scripts.
Man, coming from you, Zach, I really appreciate that. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that the both of you, Zach and Adam, your movies are thunderous. I love them both. Congratulations.
Likewise.
Thank you. And Zach, you have good taste. It's one of the best dialogue movies ever. So, honest to God, straight up.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I think that Love Fest is a perfect place to end. Thank you all for taking the time. Everybody watching wherever you are, thank you for joining us. Thank you to the Writers Guild Foundation, to Variety, the Final Draft, and the Blacklist, because why not?
Yeah.
Y'all have a good night. Thank you. If you haven't already seen these movies, I can't recommend them highly enough. Ditto the adapted nominees. And also just like watch movies. They're great. They'll change your life. And acknowledge that writers wrote them, because no one has anything without their work. So see y'all at some point somewhere on the internet.
Thanks a lot, Franklin. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Take it easy, guys.
Be well,
Thank you,
guys.
guys. Thank you, Frank.
Be well, everybody. Good luck.